I'd like to call the meeting to order, the City of Winona Planning Commission, Monday, November 28th, 2022. Would you please call the roll?
Chair Moore.
Here.
Alder Holmquist. Here. Mr. Stein. Here. Mr. Homburg. Here. Mr. Grice.
Here.
Mr. Conrad.
Here.
Ms. Fallett. Here. And Ms. Fox.
Here. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from November 14th, 2022?
I'm going to approve the minutes.
I got a motion. Do I have a second? Second. I have a second. Any changes, corrections? Chris?
One on page 5, down to the very bottom, just above the motion, it talks about that setbacks have, I don't know if the setback is 12 foot to the building proper, but the second floor will be made, rather than the setback is 5 feet, that should be 7 feet. Unless he has a different recollection, I remember enough to measure them when they said the building used to be 5 feet off the property line, they just asked for a 5 foot setback, so. Talking to Mike? Okay, so it should reflect where they actually were, was at 7 foot back.
Okay. Okay. Anything else? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes carry. Next up is a new item on our agenda known as order of business. You may recall the last time that we spoke about with some counsel from Susan, thank you, and what the school board does. We talked about whether or not we would provide the opportunity to rearrange as to not have people sit here, try to be respectful of people's time over the course of an evening, and we're still intent on doing that, but one of the questions that I raised was whether or not we can, within Robert's rules, whether we can reorder within a section, which is to say we can reorder within unfinished business or reorder within new business, but, or could we take something out of new business and jump it all the way up if somebody wanted to make a motion there, and we haven't gotten clarification from. Yes.
I can't give you a legal opinion. I can only tell you years ago we used to take them either from unfinished or new business.
Okay.
The chair might suggest that we do it, and as long as they got a motion from the commission and a second and it was unanimous, we would take any of those items out of order.
Okay.
Okay. We
Yeah.
do on occasion do that at the school board, take it out of
Take it
a
completely.
later subheading and move it up.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and we follow Roberts as well, so.
Okay. Well, I know that Doug wanted to double check with Bill Cole, correct?
Yes.
Particularly before we go ahead and initiate that new step, so I'm going to suggest that we hold off and taking things out of order. But we are going to make it a tight meeting this evening because we're here earlier and there's a special occasion that somebody is postponing to be at this meeting.
Like a birthday?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I get benefits, everybody.
Yeah. And we appreciate you being here, Rob. So with that, do we have any appearances from people who are here for something other than what is on the agenda? Anything that is not on the agenda? Okay, then we'll close the appearance section. And we will move to item number 6, unfinished business. 6A, public hearing on the request by Walter Wayne Development for consideration of a zoning permit for multifamily development at 5105 Winona Drive, case number 2-020-2022. That, gentlemen, I'll have you come up, and if you could go to the podium, and this is your opportunity to share anything you would like about your proposal.
Commissioners, thank you so much again for spending your evening with us again. We were here, my name is Randy Christensen, Walter Wayne Development. Part of our team is Mark Ott with JLA Architects. My partner, Mr. David Diamond, the president of Walter Wayne Development, is here, as well as our client, Robert Proctor, for this particular site, is in attendance. We had come before you on August 22nd and presented a plan at that time. And we presented at that time something that was a little bit taller and something that was a little bit more units. This is a multifamily proposal that we're looking for. And we heard loud and clear as far as the feedback we received back from you folks. And we went back to the drawing board and we met with our architect, and then we came back and met with Mr. Plowman as well as Alder Nancy Moore on an occasion to get some feedback as far as if we were heading in a direction that seemed reasonable. Then we also had an additional meeting with Mr. Plowman and Commissioner Chris Homburg, and we presented a little bit additional tweaking from our meeting with Mr. Plowman and Alder Moore. So we received additional feedback, and we think we've come up with something that hopefully you feel will be a great addition to your city on Monona Drive. We've reduced a few things. We'll also come up with some renderings that you can take a look at as well. So that way you kind of got a context of how the building will sit on the property in relation to the surrounding properties. With that said, I'd like to have our architect, Mark Ott, go through the particulars of the project itself. And I'm available for questions, or certainly if you, my partner, Mr. Dave Diamond, would be available as well. So thanks.
As Randy said, Mark Ott from JLA Architects here in Monona, located. Very proud of that. Doug, will someone put the presentation on screen?
Yes, I can screen share.
Sure. So as we get that pulled up, I'm sure you have the packet and our letter of intent, which kind of highlights a lot of what we're going to talk about here. But as Randy said, through those meetings with everyone and listening to the original pre-hearing, we did go back and tweak the project on a number of areas. So one of the biggest things that we heard, of course, is density. There is a movement, obviously, land is valuable and it costs, so density is getting, the densities of projects are getting pushed. So we understand that. So probably the biggest thing that we did, hearing from our previous meeting for the density and the height, was we took a whole story out of the building. So we originally pitched a 5-story building. We took that down to 4 stories, which reduced, obviously, both density and height. So as you see here on the screen, if you probably look at the first original version, you might off the top think there's not a whole lot different, but the devils are in the details. So separate of the height that we took out and reduced the density, we also tweaked the unit mix a little bit. There's always discussions about the parking ratios. So we tweaked the unit mix. Again, what we're seeing in the marketplace right now, especially at a location like this that will be able to be served by transit, being right on Monona Drive, is more people wanting to live alone than they used to. The efficiency or studio units that we call them, and smaller one bedrooms, are what we're seeing more people want. So we tweaked the unit mix a little bit more in that direction to help with our parking ratios, but also address the market, because that's what we're seeing, and people that want to live here would be more apt to commute as well for cars. We took the building, so that tweak, that helped out with the parking ratios, which also then shrunk the building footprint a little bit. So it helped our green space overall. I think we were at, I forget the number, 25-ish%. The last time we came in front of you, we're now up to almost 35%. So shrinking that because of the unit mix got more green space on the site. We also moved the building closer, again, as these discussions that were had through the different meetings. We moved the building closer to Monona Drive, which gave us more relief on the backside here of Gordon Avenue and the developments that are back there. So it was, that was a good move from two standpoints. We use, for example, in some of the discussions, we said, well, what's a good distance from the street? And right now, we've set the building to follow what's not really on screen here. It's about one parcel down from, to the north of the screen is the Fairway Glen Apartments. So we've used that as kind of our datum of how close to the street to move it, and to keep that rhythm that we've got going there. So that helped us on those two factors. And then one of the biggest things, Doug, if you can go forward, is we got into the floor plans. Lower level didn't change much, still an underground parking garage, two different entry points here to get in to create the 2 levels of parking so that we can accommodate all of the parking requirements with inside the building, no surface parking lot and no street parking. If you want to go up one more. Where some of the biggest changes happened from the original here is on the first floor. First floor, originally up along kind of these areas that are in yellow, green, and red. Originally we had 3 apartments in that location and then an entry kind of in the center. And so through the discussions and looking at that really makes sense, and hearing the feedback from the different commission members and Doug, was we got rid of that. We took off those units and we replaced it with moving our entrance to be more consolidated up towards the street and bringing in 2 different elements. We moved the fitness center from one of the upper floors down to this floor, and then we added a business hub or an incubator space, kind of depending on what you want to call it. And from an architectural standpoint, when we show and look at the elevations, the logic there is it makes more sense, but it can create, by the fenestration that we use with the windows and storefronts, even though it's not necessarily a commercial space per se, it can give that appearance on the streets as people drive by and try to tie in with the rest of the streets. One of the things that Walter Wayne can talk about, maybe in the Q&A a little bit more, is the discussion and the orientation of how we put the entrance with this, is that green space there could possibly be open to outside people who want to rent out that incubator space for a meeting, or different things that they need to have, right? If they're a work from home person and they need a space. So we've looked at options like that, and the configuration would allow for that. And that's something they're still exploring. So that could possibly be open, and I'm sure that could be discussed further on. So moving that and reconfiguring that street facade to try to give that, the mixed use look. Again, Walter Wayne and Randy can maybe talk about it. The hard part with this site, it's been vacant for quite some time. If someone, the need for commercial is reducing, right? We're just not seeing the need for as much commercial space. And it's a tight site. It's a half an acre, roughly, a little bit more than a half acre. And to try to put all those things, it didn't really want to be, we're just not seeing the need to jam commercial in here. So this was our way of trying to keep the street facade the way Monona Drive should look, and yet work in a unique solution. If we go up, you can kind of go through the other ones pretty quickly. These are just the floor plans. The things you see here in the gray, we'll talk about more when we get into the elevations. The unique part, I think, to this building are these roof decks, the carving back of the architecture, which we can see on the renderings when we get to those. You can keep going, Doug. So the floor plans just stack, and they carve back at different levels. So I think that's third, and keep going. And then fourth here is we've kept the community room facing the golf course across the street with a big front roof terrace there. So it gives us kind of 2 things. It pulls, again, that building back on the upper floor. So at least along Monona Drive, it's a relief going back from the 3 stories, and the 4 stories pushed back. It gives the amenity space in a great location, which is overlooking the golf course across the street. Again, a lot of glass up there for the tenants, so a nice use of that up there. If you want to keep going, Doug. So then we get into the renderings. You might need to zoom out a little bit or scoot it down. So here, this is the first concept. So in our discussions, our last meeting we had with Chris Homburg, the statement was, well, a picture paints 1,000 words, right? So rather than just coming in with the little colored drawings we just showed you, what could this look like potentially? And so I want to iterate one. This is a first draft. But what you can see here is this is a good example of the different roof deck elements that we have. So up along Monona Drive there, you see up on the very top of the building, that roof deck up on the top floor that we talked about. You can see one of the options there for some outdoor commercial space on the first floor is an option. And then you've got where it says signage on those two corners, again, another roof deck there that pulls the building back, rather than just a vertical wall, we keep stepping it back. And then there's one kind of tucked in the back corner there around by the corner there of Gordon and St. Teresa. If you want to go to the next slide. Here's just another image of it, what it would be, what your experience would be more from a pedestrian level, down at street level. Again, pulling the building back. Keeping the materials really high quality materials. We're using brick and fiber cement in a couple different formats. It always is hard in renderings to get the computers to capture it as accurately as we would love. The brown that's kind of up at the top there, that would actually be a simulated wood. Computer doesn't always do a great job of rendering that, but that would be a simulated wood. Again, for those probably familiar with it, there's lots of those wood accents, for example, on the current phase 1 and 2. So if you're kind of looking at what is that, it's become a pretty popular, once they crack that technology, how to make that out of fiber cement. The creamier looking one right below that is fiber cement panel. The upper one would be in a plank form, kind of traditional siding format. The cream would be a fiber cement panel, and then of course then you've got the brick. So keeping the palette relatively simple, roughly 3 materials, but high quality materials, long lasting. Again, a lot of brick along there. And then there's gray in the center there along Monona Drive. Again, fiber cement. If you want to go up, go to the next one. Here we're just rotating around. This is a good view. So this would be as you're coming basically up Monona Drive from the south. And one thing we want to point out here, so we do have the 2 different levels of the parking, and this is really where that kind of comes into play. So what we're trying to show here is that our plan would be to put some windows in the wall of the parking garage. It would be clad in brick material, and then we would use tall arborvitae, for example, to help soften that wall. So you wouldn't be looking at a wall of this brick, that you would actually, we'd work it for a combination of different architectural ways of dressing it and landscaping. So that's what we're trying to show here. The kind of shadowed, ghosted image to the left represents the, I forget now who's in there, I think Food Fight's in there.
Food Fight,
I believe
yeah.
that building used to be, I forget what their name is, started with the Devonish, right? Food Fight's in there now. So that kind of represents, we ghosted it so you could kind of see, the building. But that's where that building is and roughly the height of that. So you can see the relation there. So again, following the format, our balconies are hung. Every unit has a balcony or a roof deck. I think a couple even have 2. These are pre-manufactured aluminum, high-quality roof decks. If you want to go to the next image. We rotate around. This is kind of the same thing, more of a bird's eye view of what we just saw, as the other image was more of a pedestrian view. Next image. Here we start to rotate around to the back on Gordon. So again, here you can see what that would look like from there. The ghosted image again is roughly the Food Fight building. And again, this is first blush design. Next image. And then here is the corner of St. Teresa and Gordon. Again, kind of this masonry anchored corner, very traditional look for the street on the back side there. And then you see how it plays as you go up towards Monona Drive. Next image. Not sure if we have any more. And then just a bird's eye view, again, of that same kind of side and how it would look. So the nice parts, I probably didn't do a good job of pointing them out as we went around some of those slides, but is that carving back of those different roof elements. So again, rather than just going straight up 4 stories on all sides, adding this relief to the building, I think is one of the real key parts of this, of this kind of design. Again, love to hear your feedback on the actual materials and placement of everything. But it was our first go at it to try to get something so you guys could see maybe how this could fit in if you feel that it's appropriate. So with that, I think we would open it up for Q&A. debate, dialogue.
Great. Since you mentioned that Randy might want to speak to the new tweaking as it relates to the business center and all that, do you want to speak to that before we?
Yeah, I most certainly can. Originally, we had, when we presented back in August, we originally had a game room kind of a setup. That's something that we're seeing a little bit as well. We just felt a higher and better use incorporating a biz hub. And the reason we decided to move that direction is because we're experienced with it. We've got another project that Walter Wayne Development has developed, and it's called the Emerson on Park Street. And we put in a biz hub there, and it's highly popular among the residents there. They're in there often using it as their space per se. And it's just become a great, we got there's a couple of Zoom rooms in there, a couple little other offices in there, an area for them just to lounge. And the way we would set it up similar to what we did over at that particular project. We have a coffee area. We probably bring in, designated water lines for Keurig and so forth, so that residents could come in and utilize those type of services. And kind of the reason we know that it's being used quite often is that we've held over the past 6 months, I suppose, maybe 3 or 4 different monthly events at the Emerson, and gotten some feedback from our residents as well. That's another thing that we like to do in terms of our projects, is get some feedback from our tenants. What are you feeling? What else can we do to make your life experience at our property even better? So that's something we felt was a better use for this particular location. We just felt, bringing it up close to the street, we thought that could give that sort of commercial appearance. It's just, as Mark had mentioned, it's a very tight site, and commercial use there would certainly require some surface parking of some nature, and we just the site just doesn't lend itself. It's not that we're completely opposed to it, but we just don't feel that it's the right site for that. Conversely, even though I said we're not opposed to it, the Emerson that we've got 2,500 square feet of hard corner retail space that's been sitting for over a year. So that's on Park Street. So, and there's other examples that can probably be given as far as where those commercial tenants are at. I mean, it's just people aren't willing to expand out, I guess. So, and our unit mix, Mark touched on that. We just felt that the trend is moving. People are looking to because they can work from home, they can do those sort of things from home, and with the technology that we've got now, and that's why we felt BizHub and just the unit mix that we developed, we feel comfortable with the number of studios and one-bedrooms that we have in this project. Not only that, the affordability too. I think the studios won't be they're not nearly as large, obviously, but they support 500, 550 square feet, which certainly seems to be a good number in terms of square footage for one individual. At least that's our experience at the Emerson. I mean, those and the other project that we've done is called the Compass on West Wilson. All those studios, those are the first ones that go. So we just feel that that's a good fit for this particular location. So I think I kind of moved off a little bit from the BizHub, but you kind of got the idea of our passion and our enthusiasm for incorporating the BizHub here.
Okay, great. Is there anyone else here or online that wanted to speak during the public hearing portion? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and move to 6B, a pre-hearing conference on the request by Walter Wayne Development for consideration of zoning permit for multifamily development at 5105 Monona Drive, case number 2-020-2022. Doug?
Thank you. So as put forward, the proposal here is for the development of a 4-story multifamily residential building on the currently vacant site at 5105 Monona Drive. Plans include 45 market rate residential units with 63 stalls of covered parking. The revisions have been made to the application based on commission feedback from their meeting back in August, as well as a couple interim meetings as well. This includes the reduction in units, lowering building height, decreasing building footprint, and increasing green space, as well as moving the massing and reconsidering the ground floor uses. The site itself is currently zoned retail business, and it's likely that the development would necessitate a rezoning to multifamily residence, as the RB district only allows for ancillary residential. As far as the zoning itself, the 2016 comp plan classifies this property as commercial use in the future land use map, with the current land use listed as vacant. It's defined commercial use as land use for retail, service, commercial, and office uses. And so the commission should give some feedback here as to how the proposed use aligns with that and integrates with adjacent properties. The proposal includes a range of market rate apartments, ranging from studios through to 2 bedrooms, with the unit mix leaning heavily towards the smaller units, the studios, and the 1-bedroom units. Amenities include the roof terrace, building, business center, fitness center, and rooftop club room. As mentioned, the fitness center and business center are now on the ground floor, and that's intended to mimic the retail aesthetic, despite the fact that it will likely not be open to the public. This is a design that staff supports with the creative use of this and recognizing the relief that this can provide from the parking standards that would be needed for the commercial space, especially on a compact site like this. The lot coverage has increased from the previous proposal. As was mentioned, it was around 25%, and now it's up to 34.6%. And the typical goal for the city is 30% of open green space to be targeted. And again, as plans develop, the landscaping should be fleshed out, but it's certainly encouraging to see that increase. The setbacks have been adjusted to align closer to the Nearway Fairway Glen apartment building just to the north, which gives the benefit of adding greater setback relief along Gordon Avenue. Circulation remains similar as the first design, with 2 curb cuts into the covered parking from St. Teresa, as well as the pedestrian entrance from the same level. 63 covered parking stalls are proposed to serve the 45 units, which means per code the building would have a surplus of 2 stalls. Additionally, the building would be located in such a way that it could take advantage of alternative transportation options with a potential Madison Metro route running up and down Monona Drive, as well as nearby bike options, bike lanes as well. The Commission may choose to discuss if there are any additional incentives, car share, or alternatives that may further help limit parking pressures that the development may experience. In terms of the architecture, it's a U-shaped building facing St. Teresa with step massing to help limit the vertical element of the building, whilst also giving outdoor amenity spaces. Again, moving the massing closer to Monona Drive while having that stepped approach on the 4th floor helps limit that massing again. As mentioned previously, the project density has been reduced by over 25% from the first hearing. It's still in excess of 90 units per acre, but this owes somewhat to the unit mix with the smaller units with a higher count, as well as the modest size of the site. So density and scale were definitely discussed extensively in the meetings with staff and influenced decisions that were made by the applicant, including the ground floor use and building design. The Commission should give some feedback on this, on the density of the project and how this type of infill development can provide additional housing options within the city while still meeting the standards of the ordinance and remaining in keeping with adjacent properties. As shown in the renderings, high-quality materials are used throughout the building, with masonry on the lower levels, which would align with the Monona Drive urban design guidelines. Varied siding options add color and visual interest as well. That's it from staff. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Well, with that, in the interest of mixing it up again, I'm going to open it up to the Commission. Chris?
Me?
Yes. Would you like to
I
start?
actually just realized that I need to recuse myself from this because Robert Proctor is my real estate attorney.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Corey, do you want to start?
Sure. All right. So first of all, I want to say that I appreciate the more creative look that you've taken at this. Before it was just a big box set down on this property, and so I really like the thought that you put into it. I appreciate the discussion of what the business hub would do. That was looking at, I know it's hard with these schematics, you just drop some tables, and I was trying to figure out what you would do if that was really the layout of it, but it sounds like you would do some interior work to create more of a cafe feel, or with some Zoom rooms and things like that, and I think that would be a nice addition. It's still very dense. I guess one other question, I have a number of questions. I guess you mentioned the affordability factor of having an individual who would be able to rent a studio. I guess I was just wondering, I know that there's there's high interest rates right now, that sort of thing, but did you consider doing any type of market, or other than market rate apartments?
We have dabbed in that a little bit, but quite frankly, it's just not in our DNA. It's just not something, we're market rate developers. There's a certain niche for, doing affordable housing and so forth. It's just something that we don't have experience with. So that's why we just feel with the efficiencies, the amount of efficiencies that we have with the project, there's some affordability there for those people.
Did you have any consideration for, and looking at the unit mix on, I think the floors are about the same, right? So combining studios together to, if you want to reduce it even more, to get, I know you're going away from the studio apartment, but if you combine two of the studios together, you would get a larger apartment. You could get an even lower.
Yeah, the only fear we have with that, when you start combining those and changing it into like a one-bedroom, our parking ratios go up. So it kind of, that's why we've got that balance between the studios and the ones and the twos, to meet those parking requirements that we'd like to meet. And after meeting with Commissioner Homburg, one of the things that was pointed out that I recall it was said before, but I just didn't remember it, is that the reason that you guys have these parking restrictions is because you have you want to be able to have visitors as well. So that was something that resonated with us. So certainly people that live by themselves, they probably want to have a friend over occasionally or whatever the case may be. So that's something that we're very conscionable about as well.
How would you feel if there wasn't a Madison Metro bus that was able to pick up residents at this site? Do you think that would impact your ability to rent units here?
Not from what I'm seeing. Having the bus service would certainly be a great amenity. The BRT, and from all indications, I'm hearing that that's coming on the drive. But I don't. This particular location, we feel pretty confident with what we're presenting in terms of absorption. And from what I'm seeing, and sorry, I have my glasses up there. I do that's a habit. But from what we're seeing in terms of vacancy, there are a lot of projects here have low vacancies. So certainly a bus route is going to be a great amenity for the project. Being right there on the drive.
Okay, but it's not an integral piece of your plan, just in case it wasn't.
No, well, let's put it this way: if the BRT wasn't coming, it's not making us decide not to do it.
Okay.
Okay. If BRT is coming, it's just a great, feather in the city's cap, per se.
Okay. And then I guess thinking about, I like that you moved the building up towards the drive, and there's that patio area. I do think that'll look, give it that look that you're going for, and I think that would be nice. It does make me wonder if you have, other than the rooftops, do you have any idea for how you might use the green space in the back. I know it won't be very big,
Right.
but I'm looking at the way that the apartment building is laid out, and there's a lot of apartments with southern exposure and then a lot with northern, and they're not going to get very much sun in their windows. And I'm just thinking they might want to find a place to go and sit outside when it's nice out, other than the
Yeah,
rooftops.
So, I mean, at one of our other projects, we do have a little bit of outdoor area, but we're concerned about, you know, the 30%. If we start covering it up with concrete, then we're going to, you know, kind of run into
Oh.
danger with our 30%. But, you know, it's certainly something that maybe we can take a peek at.
I was
for
thinking
sure.
more like trees in a garden or
Oh,
something.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just like a space for, you're talking about a
Yeah.
little bit of programming in the building, you know,
Yeah.
there's a fitness center and a business hub,
Right.
but I didn't hear much about what
Yeah.
would be available other than the rooftop terraces,
Yeah.
which,
It's certainly something we can take a look at, absolutely.
and I think when you're thinking about landscape, maybe think about more than just the arbs, too.
More than just arborvitaes?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that. They're,
They're tall and green.
yep.
Yep. Okay, that's it for now.
Okay. Chris Homburg?
Okay, thanks. First, thanks for responding to everything we talked about last time. You've made a lot of changes, I think a lot of good changes. I think it's huge to have this articulation in the building and break it down from being such a monolith, I think someone might have called it last time. And I think right now, I think 3 elevations are pretty nice. I think that southern elevation is pretty boring, and the entire 3 floors of apartments are above the food fight building, so I think it'd be nice to do something more with that elevation, to put more interest in it. I don't know if it's articulation, maybe bringing some brick up somewhere like you've done in the tower in the opposite corner, just to, something to give a little more interest there. And it's hard to criticize it too much right now when I haven't seen your final renderings, what you're thinking as far as how the siding will integrate with the panels, how it will work with the brick. But for a first blush, it's a long, flat elevation, for lack of a better word, and anybody northbound on Monona Drive will see it, because this is substantially bigger than any of the buildings around there. Where do I start? Guest parking, where do the guests park? How do they get in?
Well, it's something that we're toying with. You know, we had talked about the subject of having an area where it would be shut off from the rest of them, where we have maybe an indoor garage door inside the parking. We just haven't fully vetted that out as a team as far as how we're going to accomplish that. Certainly, the other option is, you know, when we bring on new tenants for the building, we'll instruct them as far as how to let their residents or how to let their visitors or friends come in and so forth as well. That's a management side of things as well. Maybe not the most ideal scenario, but it's something that we need to vet out with the idea of having maybe 6 to, I don't know the exact number, but it would be something that we talked about.
I think it's important. We
Yep.
talked about that,
Yep,
and it's
we did.
important that people can have visitors. It's important, you know,
Yep.
for us with our ratios. It's important for you as apartment owners. You want people to be able to have people over. If they don't, they're going to leave. They're going to go somewhere where they can. So I think a combination, at the very least, of what you talked about would be important to at least have somewhere.
Yeah.
They have to be able to pull off the road somewhere to be able to even page someone that's up in an apartment. So at least if, you know, we have more than 6 stalls in here, obviously allocated for visitors, but if there are a number of stalls in the front where they can get off and at least page somebody up above that they can let them in, if you're worried about security, then they could open that door to get them further into the building. I think some way to get people off the road is important.
Yeah, no, with our management team, as would manage the building, we would want to, you know, vet out and discuss all of those particular options, Chris. You know, the other thing too is what we're a big believer in is friends love to live with friends, and we would want to have friends have their friends over.
Yep.
Most certainly. So it's not something that we're dismissing, it's just the mechanics of it. We want to make sure that the residents that are going to be living there are safe.
Okay. Okay. And I forgot to thank you for scalable plans, but thank you. So we're somewhere around 25 feet off of Gordon?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, I scaled this. Your property line's really thick, so it's somewhere in there, which is not a bad distance. In Monona, we're 30-foot front yard setbacks, but every other community around here is 25, so it'd be very similar to a front yard setback anywhere else in the community, which I think gives the Gordon Avenue residents a nice setback from this building. So I do appreciate you pulling that forward. And the 17-foot, again, we told you at last meeting that something like Fairway Glen would be perfect, and you're right about on that with something coming out even to kind of give it a little more interest. Well, I'm talking about that little more interest. You're showing an awful lot of grade coming from the sidewalk up to that. I mean, where it's going to look awkward to have that much grade coming up there.
Yeah, and that was, so we literally have had our surveyors out there just recently get the actual information. So that was, obviously, as you know, when we met with you, kind of, I don't want to say put this together kind of quickly, but didn't have all that detail. So now we do, and we're working through that, and that's not the intent to have it look like that when it's finished.
Take a look at it, so it just doesn't look like you took this building and went poof over the
Right,
ground.
exactly. Yeah.
And I know what it'll do. It'll add a little more brick and probably a railing up above. So I understand that, but the look of it right now with that steep slope coming up from all the
Yeah.
sides, for what should turn out to be a beautiful building, is not a beautiful.
No, I
site.
agree. That got slipped through on me by the renderer, and that's not our intent. So I absolutely agree with you.
Well, thank you. We saw the renderer's best work. Question, how close are those balconies to the south property line? Your building's about 10 feet. What do you think, how far out those balconies come?
So they average about 6 to 6.5 feet from the wall, so you'd be talking 4 feet from the property line if the building's about 10 feet.
Yeah, so it's getting pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, they're designed, with these being pre-manufactured, they literally just get bolted on at the end, so the install is pretty straightforward. It's literally one of the last things they do. But, yeah, I mean,
I think it'd have to be the last thing, otherwise you won't get a lift through there to do any
Right.
other work.
yep.
Since we're talking about the south side, the Food Fight building, or I'm going to call it the old Devonish building, has had issues for years and years with drainage. And it really comes from this lot, and it all slopes right into their side. And if you look at that building, I would argue it's sited a little too low. But so what happens, it gets down there against that wall. I know they put a lot of money improvements into that north wall of their building, trying to keep the water out. It goes down in their finished space down below. So I would ask that you keep that in mind. I'm going to assume you'll be internally drained with a roof drain for this?
Yeah,
And there's
so you're just dealing with groundwater, but yeah, and so.
And then there's a inlet right out, and when I want to drive, you're probably going to dump it in.
Yeah, I mean, to be worked out
To
with
be
our.
determined, I understand.
Yeah.
The reason I bring that all up is when Monona Drive was rebuilt, we asked them to put an extra lead out of the inlet that would be in front of the Food Fight building. It comes at a little bit of an angle, I believe it's still there, to be able to come up along there to solve that stormwater problem one day. But if you're coming from the other inlet and you have enough depth, keep it in mind as far as not pushing a lot of water to them.
Yeah.
I know you get all your roof water, but don't have a side slope to them going like that.
Right.
And then also, if you do have areas where you think you've got to capture a little bit, you might want to take that storm sewer and put a couple yard drains or something on that side, just to make sure you're taking care of that water. I know
was
it would
thinking the
help
same
that
thing.
building a lot.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing about yard drains as you were talking, yep.
That would help a lot on that,
Yep.
your south side, their north side. We're not to that point, but I'll reiterate what Corrine said on the landscaping. The south side needs,
Yeah,
I mean, the arborvitae is a good idea, but I mean, I'd like to see more interest on the south side, but then also you can do some of that with some columnar trees, and when Rob gets to it, I'm sure he'll have all the variety you should put in there. But I think there needs to be some variety in there, and let's be honest, we should be talking about it right now. Going to zoning, Doug, I would counter, I think we should do this CDD. And here's the reason. Number one, they've already talked about possibly having that front area open to the public. MF doesn't allow that. And when I look at this building, you're building it for 40, 50 years, we don't know what will happen. It could be in the future, you might find a cafe that wants to locate in there or something. And with the CDD zoning, it would be zoned appropriately to be able to utilize that front space, which because of the parking garage, you'll have the height and everything you need to get anything in there you want. So it makes total sense to be able to have this and have options with it. And because of that, I think I'd go CDD. And I think we've done that with most of the properties up along Monona Drive anyway. But that would be my 2 cents. Just to keep that commercial, or just that public availability. If it's that office incubator, but to keep the public coming there. So it's not just, you can't have the people there.
I got a quick question. What is CDD?
Community Design District, it's
I-
just something we have. Our zoning code's different than everybody else's, of course. And Community Design District actually gives us as a commission a lot of flexibility. It doesn't mean you have to go to a PIP GDP. So you don't have to worry about us just throwing an extra 12 steps in there.
Okay.
And I know that's the genesis of your question. When you throw initials out to developers, it's like, uh-oh. So, and as far as the appropriateness there, I believe this is, it's big density, but it's making a good use of that corner and cutting it down to we're calling it 4 stories. Of course, one of those stories is parking, which is where we get the ratios on 3 stories apartment above it. I think it hits this corner. I think it needs to be an extraordinary building architecturally to be on that corner, because I don't think it'll be a long time, if ever, that anybody builds up to your height right there. I don't see Food Fight or Wisconsin Bedding deciding to go somewhere right away. So you're going to be right there on the corner for a long, long time, shining bright with your incredible architecture you're coming back with. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Susan?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a lot to add to all that, and I appreciate the comments of the CDD. That does make sense to me as well. I also really appreciate the design changes. I just think, when I saw 4 stories, I was a little concerned, but I drove up, and, Fairway Glen has those peaked roofs for one thing, so it appears a little taller than perhaps it is. And with the step back and the terraces, I just think it looks like it would fit in nicely, even though, everything, the 2-story multifamily behind it is up a little bit on a hill. It comes up a little bit. It's not as flat land as yours. So it just looks like it would fit in nicely, I think. I appreciate that, and you answered my questions about the studios, because I'm always surprised at how popular those are, but we hear it a lot, so I'm taking your word for it. I very much appreciate your concern for the green space, and I think, moving it toward the drive, helpful. The landscaping, I guess I was thinking, I wasn't sure how much that landscaping on the south side would actually show, given that Food Fight is there, but it might be, and that's where I thought the arborvitae, I thought might be fine there, with more different kinds of trees elsewhere, but I would defer to my colleagues who know more about landscaping than I. And I think, you've hit our code for parking, so I think with an extra, I think that's fine. And I don't think, the Biz Hubs, that's a new concept for me, but it makes sense to me that would work. And I do like the idea of having it be flexible, that you could change it down the road if there was a demand for it. So, yeah, I don't have anything to add. I really appreciate the changes you made. I think it's good.
Great, Susan, thank you. Birthday boy, would you like to go next?
Okay. So I saw this in our packet, and I was like, oh boy, this project again. That said, upon looking at it, I was delightfully surprised. I think there's things to work out. A lot of things that the other commissioners have talked about, I think I don't have a lot to add to that. One of my questions was about visitor parking, and if there is going to be a dedicated space. I think that's something that is important to figure out. And that kind of related to one of my questions about the business space and the public amenities you have in the building. It actually looks really nice. And to that point, I really like the commercial appearance in the front of the building. I think it's going to lend itself to fit in along Monona Drive really well, even if it is a private space, at least for the time being. Let's see here. The density is still high, and I go back and forth on that, but I look at the number of units and what we came down to, cutting the roof of the building, and it is a difficult site. It is a really difficult site. It is parked appropriately right now. There's still some things to figure out, but that said, it's, despite the high density, it does seem to fit into this difficult spot fairly well. And if you look at the percent, or the units per acre versus just kind of removing that number and seeing how it actually fits, sometimes that number can be really overwhelming on different projects. This one, it seems to be a little bit better fit, and a lot of that's because of those units. I still think there's maybe some opportunity to consolidate some of those efficiencies into another one bedroom or two. But generally speaking, I think it could work. The sidewalk on the north side of the property, I don't know, given the elevation and if there might have to be a wall along it or something like that. To get it off the curb would be ideal, just to make it a more comfortable space. Let me see here. As far as the south elevation, I would generally agree with kind of Chris's assessment of that large facade. I think the Monona side corner of it, I think material changes could do a lot for it. I like the idea of putting in some landscaping in there. On the topic of drainage, that might be complicated depending on what's happening there. And I don't really know what's happening as far as drainage right now, but I'm sure you're going to hire a talented landscape architect to get some. I think evergreen is appropriate. Maybe some regal prints. I had to put a couple of plant names down just because I feel like Taylor junipers, star junipers, all good candidates, I think, depending on what's happening back there. But something would be ideal. That's from my list here. Zoning, I initially agreed with staff comments that this should be multifamily because a lot of the CDD projects that we've rezoned have had token commercial spaces, and this does not. But I don't know the downside of zoning this CDD versus multifamily. It seems to. I don't see a negative unless someone can point one to me. I think that's all I have for now. Okay. Oh, I am going to comment on the architecture briefly. I think the renderings are great to help tell the story a little bit better, especially the ground view ones. Sometimes the aerial ones can be a little bit deceiving. And I really like the articulation, and especially coming from the north heading south on Monona Drive, I think it really works, and some cool signage and that front space, whatever that becomes. And going back to landscaping, that front landscaping could be creative. It could be really cool. There's elevation to deal with there, but that can be your best friend for creating a dynamic landscape. And then same with the back. I don't have an answer for you. Like Corrine, if there is some respite, this relief space back there, that would be nice. I don't know what's going to be available with the topography back there, but I wanted to make that point. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't remember the meeting from August, so I don't remember having looked at this before. I know that we looked at another one that was similar about density, but so I'm going to have several architectural comments. And I want to talk first about the business center. One is I think it's a good use of space, and give you some specific advice maybe about how I think that space might be best utilized. You guys have obviously experience from your other building, but there are products that are modular phone booths, soundproof, very space efficient. I think those might be more useful than some of these hoteling spaces. Also, your conference room one that is intended for like for people, I think that's going to be a much higher value than this larger conference room, and more of that would allow people, especially if you're thinking about people who are working remotely, them being able to come to a space that theoretically could be used by one person, but still is set up for AV, because that's what people aren't going to have at home. The other thing that's going to be a high value add is the background for most people is atrocious, and the lighting is atrocious. So if you're smaller spaces that are creating value for people of like, oh, this is my destination space, so I can present well, that sort of thing, the AV setup is also a super high value thing. But generally, those are going to be smaller meetings because there may be one or two people at most. And then there might be more options for that, which then if you're thinking about these studio spaces and somebody's able to walk through that space, they could be mentally thinking, well, I'm getting a studio apartment, but really I've got this like office space that I'm able to go down to. I haven't looked into services where you can basically make those office spaces ever available for rent, but in this surrounding community, I'm sure that there are other people within like a 1 mile radius that would have the same problem. That might also be a way to just be tied into the community more. I can get into more specifics about how I would lay that space out, but I'll let you guys get into that. Concerning renderings, it's nice to have these exterior renderings. As we've been presented more apartments, it would also be interesting to see just maybe a typical concept layout or concept rendering, kind of like a staged apartment, but sort of kind of making it a little bit more vivid of, it'll help you sell the point, I think, about studios more strongly, because instead of it just seeming like a smaller piece of square footage relative to other larger spaces, just giving it a little bit of three-dimension. Generally about green spaces, I know we talked a lot about ground level green spaces, but all these roof terrace areas, I would put a lot more energy and effort into greening those. Maybe a hanging gardens, things that, you know, create more of an immersive kind of greening space experience, not just from the ground level. The exterior of the building, please don't take this too harsh, but the building looks dated. As a general, there are a lot of dated buildings that are along Minota Drive that are older, but not brand new ones. The couple of specific things about it, the balconies really throw me off. I don't know if you guys have, I don't know what budget you're working with for it, so some of these suggestions might be issues as it relates to budget, but maybe looking into cantilevered post-engined balconies that are integral to the slab poured for each of the floors, so we don't have these diagonal supports that are bracing them back to the building. I would also be interested to see any possible false glazings on some of these levels, so that there's, you've done a lot with the massing and the setbacks and things like that, but ways to do as much with texture as you're trying to do with color. You're doing a lot of things with massing and color, but maybe especially down at that parking level where you've got this brick and we've got these very high level windows. I think false glazings might be interesting down at that very ground level. Obviously, this is just my personal taste. I'm not a huge fan of this cream color, but one of the things that I thought about with this planking that you guys are doing higher up, it'd be interesting to see if, especially this might give a more domestic feel to the overall structure, as if that was adjacent to the brick that you're doing below, and then you had a lighter color up above. You guys have maybe already had design discussions about that, but I think the note in general would be the same way that you're focused on colors and massing, thinking about texture and reflectance as well in terms of ways of differentiating things. That's why I'm thinking about the false glazings and I agree with this elevation change along Minota Drive, but rather than losing the earth, that might be a really interesting place to do some really high value, like presented landscaping. I don't know that I'd add more building or take the ground level down, but maybe do something very interesting with the glazing. With the back to the balconies, and I've talked about some other false glazing, maybe some different material selection versus a metal railing. I agree with the rest of the Plan Commission that I think this is going to be an anchor building for a long time, so giving it a more of a classic, well, giving it a lot more of like a modern or modernist kind of look to it, I think will give it more kind of timeless appeal for a long time. In general, at first blush, I like the general volume of the structure. I know that there was some conversation about the parking. I personally think most of that can be addressed if you were intent on how it was striped. So if there was a subsequent presentation, just where those might be indicated. I don't know that an interior garage door, we saw that in another drawing, that just seems, that might paint you into a corner for changes that might happen in the future. I think that a lot of visitors would probably attend or abide by whatever striping plan might be. Yeah, I don't have an immediate negative reaction to the studio apartments. I could see this being a place where maybe a lot of younger folks, this might be the first place that they live on their own in. Again, if there was just a simple sort of standardized rendering of what some of how a space like that might be staged, it might bring it to life a little bit more. I would do the same thing. I'd be really interested to see a kind of lived-in experience of those common spaces, like the club room or the business space. These are all just things, just helping bring those. This is where people are going to be doing their living just as much as we do them to the outdoor spaces. I would be interested to see that for the indoor spaces.
Anything else? Brandon?
No.
Brian? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'll start with the biggest one that I had as feedback last time, which is density as it relates to parking. And what I think this revision has really kind of reinforced in an odd way is what we've frequently said, that if someone has a parking issue, they usually have a density issue. And I think what is unique here is we have something that is meeting our parking requirements because of a different allocation of unit mixture. And I think what that doesn't speak to is the issue that we often point to, which is units per acre, because that just tends to be an easier thing to kind of think about as it relates to density. And units per acre isn't necessarily the best, potentially is not one of the best ways to think about density, because not only is it a unit, but it's a number of individuals living within units per acre, I think, is what a lot of people walk away with density, is number of people, as well as number of visitors, as well as number of vehicles and other aspects that are contributing to that. All that to say, the number still seems really large to me, but when I see that it's meeting parking issues, and when I see that the reduced footprint is also meeting our green space aspects, and we're almost at our front yard setback on Gordon, and we've been able to pull the front of the building somewhat to the equivalence of Fairway Glen. I think it's meeting all of the other pieces of the elements that we've talked about at back in that August meeting of, boy, I think this is just too much for the site. All that to say, I think you've done a nice job of tweaking all of those variables to be able to do what you can to hit those numbers. And I think, although it was mentioned earlier, and I know this will come up again further along the way, and that it has to do with affordability. Even if I understand different developers have different niches, and I'm just going to bring it up now because I know it's going to come up not only here, but it will come up after Plan Commission at other bodies, and that will be looking at affordability and what is it that you're really looking for price point. I do understand the affordability of a studio dollar value compared to a two-bedroom is significantly different. I get that. I think what we're also looking at is the number of individuals living within a unit, and what is that when you're looking at the AGI and who are the clientele that it is that the building is trying to serve. And not only, if there are ways to look at some other affordability or workforce housing or other components, I think it will only be a benefit to the project, even though I know it may not be the niche that you guys are in. I know it's a major concern across our county. I know it's a major concern for us in the city of Monona. So I think being able to dig into that some might prove to be a good endeavor if we could incorporate some workforce housing concepts, or specifically workforce housing LIHTC. Other than that, I think the renderings and all the other pieces, you've got a ton of feedback, and I agree with pretty much all of it. When I look at the south elevation, I agree that it's a long, straight area. Another part that just really caught my eye was the Gordon Avenue side. It is a nice front yard setback, but it is, unfortunately, I think, going to just be dead grass space. Not dead grass, but in the sense of there's nothing that allows any programming back there. There's no walkout units back there. There's no pedestrian reason to be back there. And I would hate to lose that space, and I'm not sure if there's a way to incorporate any of that at all. I think the elevation on that backside does seem similar to the elevation on the south side. I think it just seems pretty vacant. But then again, it's a much shorter elevation. Just trying to consider what could happen back there. I would hate for it just to be this great seating area that no one goes to. So trying to balance those pieces with it. That might be everything. That was everything I think I had for you. Looks good.
I just have a couple of things. One is, I know initially before you had the business hub, you, at least in part of that space, you were indicating that there would be some sort of a property management office or rental office, and I'm wondering, I'm assuming that with the numbers that you're looking at, you would still need to have somebody there on site besides somebody sitting in the mailroom, maybe not, but so could you speak to where the property management office is going?
Yeah, the size of this particular project doesn't really, quite frankly, warrant a leasing office.
Okay.
It just, the threshold that we've experienced, it's about 80 to 100 units.
Okay.
In order to have someone staff it there, because of just, it just seems to be, that's the kind of the threshold. And even our project that we have downtown, we're 41 units. We don't really have an on-site, leasing office or anything of that nature. And it seems to just I mean, our management company is pretty experienced. So.
Second thing is, I noticed that you drew in a whopping 8 bikes rack, and I'm assuming with that many units, you're going to need a lot more than 8 racks. So I know that may be detail that you're not in now, but there's a couple of things there that are connected. One is bike space, and the second one is we're finding that there are a number of developers that we're certainly advocating all of our developments now to be roughing in for EV and roughing in for solar because it's much cheaper, and especially given that we haven't done a development on Monona Drive that is a flat top development. We've been sticking to the pitched roofs. We just don't want to see flat roofs go up without solar these days. So.
Yep. So absolutely, our plan is to make the roof completely structurally and mechanically solar ready.
Okay.
We're not far enough in to know if we'll put any in immediately, but definitely it's something that we believe in as well, that putting in all the infrastructure so that it's easy to put in later. As far as EV, exactly the same. It's basically it's not local, I mean, there's still a cost of putting it at the beginning, but it's much easier to deal with during construction and design for both how many do you want to put in immediately, and then again, the rough-ins, later. The big part there is working with your electrical designer for the future amount so that they size the electrical service and gear when they order it appropriately. That's where a lot of the costs come in later, so definitely for that. And then for bikes, our plan is, it's not shown on the plan, but would be that besides the racks, which we're still looking at how many we can put and where not, that we would have racks on the wall above the cars. So they're not called out on there, but we would plan on, as close to one-to-one bike racks as possible. Yep.
Okay. Great. And I would certainly agree with the comments around the south side, needing some attention, and having something on the backside by Gordon, having something that breaks it up a little bit so that it's not just a big flat grass spot. And I would concur with Brian's comment as well around affordability. I mean, I understand that's not your DNA, Randy, but the other developments that we've approved that have had an affordable housing component to it, it's not like the units are any different. It's just a percentage of the units that you offer at a reduced rate, and nobody knows who's paying what and the rents except for you, and you get tax credits for it. So it's not like you're designing something differently for one type of client versus another. And I just know, as Brian said, I know it'll come up. If not here again, it'll definitely come up when this moves, if this moves to the city council, because it's something that is a real issue. So, anything else? Yeah.
I just had one clarification that I think just will help everybody. And I tried to look where the parking is on the street. When I think of visitors to a building this size, okay, yeah, if we have 6 stalls are inside, but then what happens when those 6 are kind of filled? If Google Maps is somewhat accurate on their street view, St. Teresa in this block on the south side is no parking. On the north side, so the opposite side of the street, is 2-hour parking. However, the next block over looks like it's no parking on the south side of the street. On the north side, it doesn't look like it's restricted parking at all. And my guess is at some point in time, that building on the north side of St. Teresa maybe was the driver for the parking being 2-hour. But I don't think the street width would accommodate parking on both sides of the street, and so it's only been on one throughout that whole corridor. But just another kind of thing to throw out there for people when we look at where's the visitor going to park, how far away. There seems to be some street parking in the area, even if it's short term to, hey, come on downstairs, or I'm going to run up and then we'll close them off. So.
Anything else, Chris?
Could I ask, are you anticipating asking for any TIF financing?
Yes, we are.
Okay, because otherwise it wouldn't go to the city council.
Right. Okay. Anything else from commission members? Okay. That being the case, do you have any other questions of us? Are we clear in terms of what?
Yeah, I think Mark and I were feverishly writing notes down and so forth. I think we've got even clear idea, and some of the input has been very, very useful from our standpoint. But I would just like to extend thank you to the commissioners that have sat with us, and Doug Plowman's been a champion with this. I mean, he's been very helpful and so forth. So it's a breath of fresh air working with folks that want to help. So we appreciate that very, very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Just, Nancy, just one other thought, and actually kind of based on Brandon's comment about your BizHub and what you might do with it. The Monona Bank on Atwood Avenue, now Lake Ridge Bank, but they have a community room There was a little cafe in there, but they also have some podcast rooms that are soundproof, and they're extremely popular. So I just thought if you're thinking about that, it was kind of a neat thing. I mean, it gets booked all the time, from what I understand. I was in there one day, and it was just
That's a great
interesting.
point. I mean, I wrote that soundproof down right away,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's a great point, because people want to go into a room, they sure as heck don't want to have people listening in the conversation.
Right.
So that's a great point. I wrote that down immediately, so
Yeah, and I think
appreciate that.
they actually have equipment in there that you can do a podcast.
Yeah,
on.
yeah,
So
no,
It's very cool.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
That was all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to number 6C. Public hearing on a request by Madison Pediatric Dental and Orthodontics LLC for consideration of a zoning permit for construction of a new dental office at 220 West Broadway, case number 2-019-2022.
Yes, if I could. My name's Aaron Breitenfeld with Robert E. Lean Associates. We are the engineer on the project. We also have on the line Ian, Jen, and Len. With
We need better volume.
Hang on 1 second here. We're just a little bit too low, so we can't hear you. We're working with our media department.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Try talking again now, please.
Try talking again now and see if we can hear you.
Okay. Is this better?
A little bit more.
Any better?
Keep talking.
Keep talking.
Okay.
That's better.
You think?
Any better yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I
better.
think that's
Thank
good.
you. Appreciate the
That's
patience.
better. Okay. Yep, no problem.
Go
Like
now.
I
Go
said,
right
I'm
ahead.
Aaron Breitenfeld. Sorry, what was that?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So I'm Aaron Breitenfeld with Robert E. Lean Associates. We are the civil engineer on the project. We also have on the line Ian, Jen, and Len with Nolan Carter. They're the architects for the project and the primary client contact. And we were here a couple months back, I believe in August, with a preliminary site plan. And at that time, we were looking to try and reuse that existing Rutabaga Paddle Sports building, a lot of that parking layout or parking lot. And after meeting with Plan Commission and some subsequent meetings with the owner, we really just found that the overall layout of the site wasn't very conducive for what we were looking to do. We likely could have made it work, but there would have been a number of concessions the owner would have had to have made. Likely the biggest issue really was the parking layout. We were kind of right at the minimum number of stalls we would have needed, and we would have likely needed to push some customer parking towards the back. We couldn't have fit them all to the front of the building where we'd like to. And that means people would have been using the ramp, running up alongside the building to get into the main entrance, or entering in the back and going up through some stairs and an elevator. This wasn't ideal. We looked at a couple other options for the parking. We did take out that connecting drive from our main site to our off-site parking kind of just to the northwest here that's shared with the apartment complex there. We did get some stalls back there, but then in the back, we looked at possibly moving the front entrance or moving the entrance to the back of the building, which just not ideal for this site. It would be kind of hidden back behind the building and kind of confusing. And the parking layout in the back, in order to get the number of stalls we needed, would not have been ideal either. The flow wouldn't have worked very well. So after looking at it a bit closer, we kind of took a step back and looked at the site as a whole and decided that maybe we're better off with kind of a new site altogether. That way we have more of a blank slate. We can move that building around, get a larger, more contiguous parking lot out in front of the building, and just provide a better flow for the site to get traffic into the site first of all, and then get people in and out of the building a little bit more efficiently. So we're here tonight. The biggest thing we're looking for, kind of feedback-wise, is what's everyone's thoughts on this overall site layout now? If things are approvable and we get positive feedback, we'll look to nail down what this building could look like at maybe another preliminary meeting. Like I said tonight, though, we're kind of just looking at feedback on the overall layout of the building and the parking lot. But with this layout, we are able to generate quite a few more parking stalls. We're able to get people in and out with continuous flow. People can get dropped off at the front entrance and circulate back through the parking lot. With that, I guess I'll leave it up to Nolan Carter if there's anything you guys want to add to fill in the blanks, or from there we'll really just kind of look for your feedback.
Yeah, my name is Ian. I'm the principal architect on the project with Nolan Carter. Thanks for taking the time tonight, Planning Commission, to hear what is really a preliminary hearing for what we're looking at as an adjustment of the direction of the project. Undoubtedly, the owners, didn't endeavor to go into this with the purchasing of the building than to, opt to tear down. But like Aaron had indicated, we went through a lengthy process of not only, and I wasn't at the first pre-hearing, I know Aaron was, and so was Jen, but some of the concerns with the parking, and then there's the adjacent property that is owned by the new owners that has an easement agreement on it, and there's cross-access and utilization to the apartment complex next door, which then puts a higher load onto the parking requirements. And needless to say, as we went through our process of trying to find what would be an optimal design for not only the parking lot, but the building, and bringing people in and patients and loading them into the building, you start to get into a position where you're making a lot of not great choices at a fairly significant expense in order to make something work that may not just be capable of working the way that it should. It's a shame the building coming down, but at the end of the day, with the investment and trying to not only create a optimal place for their business and their patients and the parking and having ample enough space and depending on what their growth looks like, we just came back continually to the same idea that it might be better for us to look at this from a clean sweep and start over again on the site. So like Aaron had indicated, I think what we're really trying to achieve here is to see if, what the objections would be to something of this sort as we start to go to invest in more time to develop it with the understanding that we would be coming back with if this direction would seemingly be something that would be considered and okay by the Planning Commission to at least entertain and move forward with, we would come back for another pre-hearing with a fully developed concept, 3D renderings, and an idea of what the building end and site plan and elevations would look like. So that is what we're here for tonight.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else here to speak during the public hearing portion of this proposal? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and move to number 6D, the pre-hearing conference on the request by Madison Pediatric Dental and Orthodontics LLC for consideration of a zoning permit for construction of a new dental office at 220 West Broadway, case number 2-019-2022. Doug?
Thank you. So the request here, it's a pre-hearing request for the construction of a new building and site improvements for new use at 220 West Broadway. The Madison Pediatric Dental would be moving from their current location at River Place. The zoning for the property here is a community design district. The zoning permit is required due to the change in use as well as the construction that is planned. The 2016 comprehensive plan lists this as commercial use, this parcel, in both the current and future land use maps, which is defined as land use for retail, service, commercial, and office uses. At the August 22nd pre-hearing, the parking driveway both were discussed quite extensively, as well as the agreements and the shared parking with Yahara Terrace, formerly Tracer. In terms of site circulation, the site would still make use of the 3 existing curb cuts. There's no longer the internal driveway, and that instead there would be a sidewalk, most likely connecting staff back to the parcel and towards the building. The circulation and flow with the relocation and the proposed building would be much simpler. The parking itself, standards would require that for medical dental clinics should have one parking space for each 300 square feet of gross floor area. Plans indicate there are about 15,000 square feet, which would require approximately 50 parking stalls to meet the city code. As proposed here, we've got 68 parking stalls on the main parcel, including 4 handicap accessible stalls, with an additional 28 stalls shown on the adjacent parcel to the west. I did have a chance to take a look at the previous approvals and just go through the history of that for the Tracester development. Looking through the approvals, they were from September of 2012. There was a finding of fact in the approvals talking about a shared parking agreement with nearby sites, and one of the conditions of approval was that a copy of the shared parking agreement be given to the city, be shared with the city. I did not yet locate that, but just wanted to give the background that it was expected that these stalls would be used in the off hours for the business use. So they were really overflow for the apartment building, but the primary use, the intended use, was that these would be for the commercial space that's currently under consideration. So they did count towards the stalls that were required. They were I think just about 15 stalls short in total with all the commercial space that was proposed at the base. But they were, even on those plans from 10 years ago, this was shown as owned by this property, 220 West Broadway. So in terms of the building improvements, just the massing or the footprint is shown on the plans here. The letter describes that there will be a 2-story building, and I have spoken to the applicant about the design elements that may be needed in this, given its proximity to River Place, and some advice and guidance may be shared with the commission tonight in advance of a future design. Operating hours expected to be 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, which would give opportunity for overflow parking on the weekends, certainly for the Yahara Terrace, the apartment building adjacent. And in terms of landscaping, Sheet 2 states that there would be 32.5% of the site dedicated for green space, which would meet the city's target of 30%. Given the number of parking stalls, extensive landscaping would be required. That could be in some of the tree islands, but also the area to the closer to the water, but also some facing West Broadway, certainly. That's it from me. Thank you.
Before I open it up to the rest of the commission, I do actually recall from the other side, which is to say, been affiliated with Rutabaga for quite some time, and I very definitely remember that shared parking agreement. The only question was whether, if the building was sold, if it transferred over to the new owner, if it was something that changed. I don't know, so we're going to find, obviously finding that will be critical, but I remember at the time. So with that, I will start down on this end, actually, since I looked the other end before. Susan?
Yeah, I think the project makes sense. It certainly is compatible with the plan as commercial use. It wasn't clear to me when I drove in there where the 28 stalls on the Yahara Terrace are. I saw 12 or 13, I think it's marked on here. Along the edge, they're actually clearly marked Rutabaga right now, and it wasn't clear to me where the other stalls were, but that's something to get ironed out, obviously. I think the design makes sense. I mean, the parking, it looks like it's enough parking. You've almost got enough on the lot itself, it looks like, to meet the requirements. And as far as landscaping along Winona Drive, it should be fairly robust landscaping, just around Broadway. Sorry, that's Broadway. But I think the site plan makes a lot of sense, and landscaping, new landscaping will be along with it. The hours certainly seem compatible, and I think that the fact that it's just Monday through Friday does argue for, if there is shared parking with the apartments, it shouldn't be an issue. Lighting would come later. signage would come later. I don't know if you'll be thinking of a landscape sign anywhere or just a building sign. I'm not sure where you put a landscape sign, but it's something to come later on. So I don't have any other comments. Basically, is the basic plan at this point.
Brendan?
Okay. Yeah, it's a bummer to lose the building. In terms of, like, I understand from a practical perspective, the space, and I think the building is, if I was to think about the site in terms of where the value is, it's actually that waterfront that I think is even higher value than the building itself. Yeah, it's a bummer to lose the building. I don't know if you guys looked at concept designs for this, but possibly swapping the way that you're laying the site out. There's already a lot of development that's nearer to Broadway. If there's, if you might give any design consideration to a concept layout that puts the parking behind the building, and leaves more of a setback, that might actually also create more landscaping opportunities that are a little bit more picturesque towards the waterfront. Also maybe less hardscape, that you're introducing. Anyways, just in general, I'd be interested to know if you guys have looked into a version of this that swaps the parking in the building. Based on what the size of the building is, it looks like with the existing curb cutouts, that might still work. Yeah, that's my biggest initial reaction. I get the practical.
Can I speak to that quickly? Thanks for the comments on that, and I agree. So what our first endeavor was to do was actually to expand onto the existing building to give it the footprint expansion it needed for their requirements for their programming for inside, and having it in the grade. So really it comes down to the grade, and maybe Aaron can speak a little bit more to this too, that there's stormwater management and the grade, and when you start to push back to that area, it's a full story drop going to the back side. So really what our first plan was to expand the building up front and create that up front, and we were going to expand to the same setbacks that were there with the adjacent buildings. I think that's to the east, I believe that is. But really that's where we started to run into our issues. So just to kind of follow up on that, that was actually our first approach. And that's where we started running into over and over dead ends of, we could make it work, but it wouldn't be good design from just the bringing people in and out and the transfer from lower to upper and ADA access and parking fields. I just wanted to throw that in there because that was our initial approach on the project design.
So just to maybe play that back
just
to you.
to kind of add that. Sorry, just to add to that a little bit. Like Ian said, there's probably four-ish feet of drop within that building footprint there. And up where the parking lot where we currently show it is pretty level. So this allows us to kind of keep our parking lot up at grade. We can get some underground stormwater treatment in there. And then we can start to lose some ground alongside the sides of this building back towards the river. So it just kind of fits the grade a bit better.
So to play that back to you, it would be parking on a hillside. If the parking lot was in the back, it'd be a hillside parking lot.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it would come down to two, transferring patients from, just from even from the and yeah, so there'd be parking on a grade, there'd be walkways on a grade, and then if we're loading people into the building, we ran into that, our main parking field for the patient parking would be in the rear, and the grades become an extremely difficult problem, and then even from a safety standpoint.
Okay. I was just trying to think about ways that from a heritage of the place and space that was there, if there's any way to incorporate that at all into the design, not even with the building layout as you have, you're going to come back with landscaping later. I don't know if there's a pathway back there. I'm not sure, but I understand exactly what you're saying as it relates to a grade problem. It's a bummer. It's a real
Yeah, it
bummer.
is, because the building actually is a very good building. It's spancrete floors. You know, for this would work out great. It's a rigid metal frame that goes from side to side. It is an absolute shame. And prior to coming to this, I mean, we really dug into about as any option we could to get creative, and kept on coming to the same conclusion, and had to present it to the ownership, because obviously even for them, I mean, thinking about the fact that they bought a property with a building and now they have to take it down, it's a shame. But yeah, just wanted to let everybody know that yeah, it was not our first choice, and if we could have definitely made it work. And some of the last, I guess, straws to it were even from the ownership being responsible with their parking and making sure that they had ample enough for their patrons, the people that they serve, and not wanting to have them potentially, awkwardly walk into different places or park down the street, or park in an overflow. And like you said, with the cross-access agreement, some of the concerns came to, and I think somebody said there are posted, I think, 12 or 13 stalls. So at some point in time, Rutabaga and Nextdoor, they probably, whether it's, we have not been able to find the exact, agreement, but obviously they had it posted. So there must have been something prior to that, whether it was an unwritten idea, but really even with that, the owners, it was cumbersome, and it was something that you couldn't bank on, that those parking spots would be available for their patients at all times. So it really started to get into a conundrum, so to speak. So
I don't know that I have any other. I feel your pain. I hear the struggle. I see it. Looking at the topography here, yeah. I understand why you've laid it out as you have.
yeah, I wish I could take the building and put it somewhere else, but yeah, it's an unfortunate circumstance. Thank you.
Fine.
I won't go through that same exercise. I'll just say I agree. The taking down of a building is extremely unfortunate. Given that, I do think if this was a blank slate, I think what you have laid out here, I think, is appropriate given the property to the west of here. I think having that parking up front, I think, solves your issue of it's a much flatter lot, allows site circulation to be significantly improved. I think the building can be placed in a way, and it can be a very attractive building. When you indicate it's a two-story building, it will be two-story from the parking lot grade, or two-story from the grade at the back, which is about a 10-foot difference from front of lot to the back of lot.
So and again, we'll probably be working through this now as pushing into this a little further. Even with the site design, I know Aaron and his team put this together fairly quickly so that we can get on the docket, because if you can imagine, this is kind of a complete deviation and shift in scope direction. But the idea really, as we started looking at it, is it would be 2 stories above the parking lot grade. With the water conditions and the adjacency to the water, we would still have a slight exposure to the lower, but that may end up, just because of the heights and the adjacency to water, we may have a small lower mechanical area there and crawl space, but the intent would not have that whole lower, depending on where the grades hit, the lower would just be mechanical and potentially a small basement area for storage, but otherwise the 2 stories would actually be above grade, above the parking lot, first floor level.
All right. Other than that, looks good.
think this is a great use for the site. I'm happy to hear that the ownership is willing to invest in a new building for this property. That said, I think the site plan has a couple things that stand out to me. The building is pushed all the way in the back for reasons described before, I understand. But you pushed it all the way back and you're going to build this new building and there's 10 feet between the edge of parking lot and the front of the building. And that is, I don't think that's a good answer. I wouldn't build a building and then put bumpers right up into the front window. It's not a very good entrance, I don't think. Which brings us to parking, and it's woefully overparked. This is usually a problem we never have. But I think there's an opportunity to eliminate a fair bit of parking and get that 32.5% up and improve landscaping and green space. And did I hear that you're going to do underground storage for stormwater?
More than likely, yeah.
I mean, maybe there's room to reduce how much you have to do with that if you can reduce some of the parking. It's just, I just look at it and it's just shoved all the way to the back and there's very minimal green space. And the parking, from what I heard, isn't needed. I don't know how many max employees are going to be there at a time and what's kind of the max patient. That would be valuable information, I think, to understand, you know, what the parking needs are. But there's more than, there's 96 stalls for what is required for 50. You don't have to say
Actually,
that's too much parking.
Actually, Aaron, I think that calc is incorrect, isn't it? With the 50 for 15.
Well,
are you there, Aaron?
yes, I'm just looking at what we had in there.
Because I believe what we were looking at is potentially a 24,000 square foot with the two-story, with a potential with 12,000 and 12,000 stacked on top of each other, correct? Or something in that.
Right.
I
That
can,
gets it more closer to 80 required.
Yeah.
yeah, I can just address
And
that.
96, the 96 does take into account using all the off-site parking stalls as well, and depending on what we turn up with this agreement, I mean, we're going to lose a dozen possibly right there if we can't use those far western ones.
Okay.
Just for the floor area calculation, it was just the discrepancy. I saw the footprint of a circa 12,000 building, but the letter just said it was approximately 15,000, so I didn't know if it was a modest second story. So
Okay.
certainly, I think that owes to that calculation.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize about that. I think that might have just been some error in the final sizing with what the need would be.
Okay. Well, that changes things a little bit, but my comments about where the building's sited and the approach of the building, I think still stand. And it sounds like there is, it's still overparked, it sounds like. Sounds like we need to get that kind of dialed in, and understanding the needs of the clinic itself would be valuable information. Because I think there's room to bolster the green space in this and create a more attractive entrance to the building, because it's going to be a brand new building, assumably looking really sharp, and it would be a shame to line it with bumpers.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree.
I think those were my main comments. I love the use. I think it's great. I'm really happy to hear that business is staying in town. I was going to comment on, there's a lot of talk about the adjacent River, what is it called?
River Place.
Yeah, and it's next to it, but it's across the street. The closest, I mean, the buildings that front Broadway are essentially the backs of the buildings. I don't know how much it needs to look exactly like those buildings. We're an eclectic city. I think if it did, that would be okay, but my personal opinion, it's its own site and it's removed enough from those buildings, and a lot of those buildings are masked by really nice shade trees, but my 2 cents on that, so.
Yeah, thank you. Chris, too?
I think the only thing I want to talk about is the parking. We no longer go to this business, but we did for a while when we had different dental insurance, and it's a madhouse. I mean, it's an awesome business. There are a lot of employees, and there are a lot of parents and children, and so I suspect this. It's appropriate that they did this much parking, despite the, it's not very appealing. I do agree with Rob that it would be nice if the facade, the entrance of the building could have a little more green space. The only other comment I would add is it's a lot of kids walking from cars into the building, and I'm not a parking lot expert, but I'm a driver, and I have a small child, and I mean, parking lots are very scary and very dangerous places, and I think it would be a good idea to explore some of the solutions I've seen people with parking lots come up with respect to safety. For example, requiring cars to only go in one direction, kind of one way. And I've also seen angled spots used to help encourage people to only go one way. So I think that would be worth looking into. And then, of course, I always want to talk about EV. I know most people are just coming here for an hour, but it's always good to plan for the future. So that's all I got.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, I was thinking of the same thing that you were just talking about. There's a lot of kids, and I've seen, where they put a sidewalk in between. I don't even know where to look. There's nowhere to look. To put a sidewalk.
I think I know what you're talking about. It has between the rows.
Yeah.
They have them at grocery stores at times where you can actually walk to the front of the car and then walk towards the building.
Right, just in that center spot, that might be something, I don't know if you have the space, the width there, but that would be something to look into to help with that concern that Chris raised. Pedestrian and non-vehicle access was something that I was wondering about with the whole site. So I think as you're getting further along in your plans, just make it a little bit more clear how the employees who are parking in the adjacent lot are getting to the front of the building. You mentioned that there's a sidewalk, but I don't know if I'm just missing it, but I couldn't figure out what I'm looking for. Right there, that's it? Okay. So maybe think about extending that sidewalk all the way to the front door somehow, maybe along the side. Also, the location, I know people typically drive their children to the dentist, but there are a lot of people that do have their bicycles, and so I guess, and there's also bike access to the site, so think about how a bicycle might want to use this site and where they would park. I think that would be a really important thing to consider and put into this design as well. And I also was, I felt similarly that you're building this beautiful building and it's so far back in the lot, and there's just this expanse of parking in front, and I understand the limitations that you have for the site, but maybe once you do think a little bit more about what amount of parking you need, maybe there'd be a way to shift it somehow. Otherwise, one of the thoughts, I don't know if you've been to the new health clinic on Fish Hatchery, but they have this pretty beautiful garden on the way into the building. So the SSM Health building just might be something to look at. I think that would get to what Rob was mentioning with having a little bit more landscaping, a little bit more interest. And then Also, I guess if you are thinking you might have any outdoor space for your employees, just to think about where that would go and what that would look like, and make sure that that's included in the next set of plans. That's it.
Thank you.
Chris, one.
Okay, thanks. Excuse me. I'm one of the dinosaurs left that was here when Rutabaga was built, and I'm also one of the dinosaurs that was on the original River Place guidelines for architecture, and obviously that building was built before we had the guidelines in place because it looks nothing like anything else in the area. But it's become this just eclectic architecture of Monona that we all love. Having said that, you're doing the right thing. It's going to break my heart when I see the building go, but you're doing the right thing on what you're trying to do here on this project because it wasn't working at all for what you're doing, and I'm very well of the grade there. And the way you've laid this out, I think, is the only way to lay it out. And of course, you're building something for the next 40 years or 50 years, and hopefully this will be just as spectacular. I have a little bit different take on the parking. I have a little experience with dental clinics, and they take a lot of parking. Our code does not reflect what a dental clinic needs, and we went through that with that small clinic that's looking at a different site here. There's just more needs. Operatories usually don't take a lot of square footage. Doctors, a lot, I don't know about your dentist, but a lot of them work 2 operatories at a time, and you've got one for the hygienist, and it's really what Rob came back to. It's the count of what do you really need, because I'm sure you don't want to pay for asphalt and parking that you don't need, but I'd be surprised if you could cut this down. I think you probably need all this parking. Having said that, you've put it where it belongs. I like the ideas of having sidewalks in there, but there's no width left to do it. You're tight on this site. I agree that the building should be pushed back a little further because you want to have something really neat, cool when you come up, some nice landscape when you come up to that building, something that your owners and your doctors can appreciate every morning when they come too. If we can't get something for the kids and the people in the parking lot for a sidewalk, generally the parents bring them in there. I'm not aware of too many that send their kids in for pediatric care that don't escort them. As far as where your extra parking is, I'm not as worried about that one because I'm sure you're going to keep it for employees, and so it'll be people before hours or during a shift change, but responsible adults that can work their way through a normal parking lot. As far as the easement agreement, if it can't be found, the only one that really hurts is Trista. These people own that lot. This is their property. So it's their property to use how they choose, unless somebody can come up with that easement and say, hey, I'm Trista, or whatever we call it now, and I have a right to use it. Otherwise, they could sign this whole thing for their own use. So as far as this approval that we're looking at tonight, it doesn't really, I think, affect them other than if the apartment building comes back and says, we have this easement agreement. And if they can't find that, it should be recorded. But if they can't find that, that's bad for them. But I remember when we approved it, this was more of an overflow parking for them when Rutabaga wasn't using it. And with the dental clinic, they'll have less hours than Rutabaga, so it will still work for an overflow. But we have to understand it's by the grace of this owner that Trista gets to use it for overflow, not the other way around. Just be aware that your trash enclosure is probably about where it belongs, but it's also in front of the building, and it'll be required to have the same architecture as your building. In other words, in this area, and I do think we need to follow these guidelines somewhat. We're right adjacent to other buildings. The guidelines don't say what the building has to look like. It says you need a lot of masonry, you need good durable materials, you need to do some things to make it look appropriate for the area. It doesn't say it has to match the building next door, but it does talk about the type of materials, and we ask for a little nicer materials here and some of the architectural detailing you're going to do. As far as where the building's placed, other than pushing it back a little bit to get that nice landscape area in the front, as Brian said, it matches right up with your immediate neighbor. I mean, that's a massive building next to you, and it's back that far with the parking lot right in front. So I think it'll look appropriate there. You're aware, of course, that there's a boardwalk easement along your back property line?
Yes, we do.
Yes, yep.
Okay, because the city's built it all the way out up to your property. I don't know what the intention is, but it never did cross the Rutabaga property because there's all these issues with launching kayaks and canoes, and do we want to have the public going across that area where they're dragging stuff out all the time? All I'm bringing it up for is, plan for it, because it's quite conceivable that the city might want to build that out all the way to the, up through to Tresta, I keep calling it Tresta, forgive me, all the way up to the park. Yeah, that's certainly in the long-range plans, so, keep that in mind when you do it. And as far as access to it, you have the sidewalk right next to you, but it's not on your property and where it comes out, so I'm sure well aware of that. I think this is a great proposal. I think it's a terrific project. I'm looking forward to some interesting architecture on the building.
Thank you.
I don't usually weigh in, but let me just say I am really, really struggling with nothing but parking on the corner. It just seems to me that we have worked really hard pushing the buildings up closer and having more of an urban feel in all of the new developments that we've created. I know the two huge buildings, Yahara Place and River Place, it's a little bit different, but just parking in front because there's it's a multi-use. There's establishments that, but God, I'm really, really struggling with not having a building on that corner and instead having nothing but a blacktop. I'm humming Joni Mitchell all over again. And I just feel like, the buildings that are to the east, obviously, we put them close to the sidewalk and close to Broadway, and I don't know, it just, to me, it just, I'm truly sorry you have to tear down the building. I get why it works to tear down the building, but having a huge, massive paving there just really doesn't work for me. So I will leave it at that. Anything else? Yeah, Chris.
I understand your angst and what you'd like to do, but we've done a lot of work on this site. We couldn't get ADA grades up the side of that building to have ADA stalls anywhere but right in front of the building because it's so steep in there. It really is a lot of grade.
Well, I could see putting ADA stalls in the front of the building. They are now, but I don't know, it just seems to have a building all the way back like that and to have that, especially because we're saying they need this much parking. It's going to be one of the largest parking lots in comparison to the size of the building in the entire city.
It'll match what's right next door and all the stuff as it fronts the road. As you come around here with apartments, I'm sorry, not apartments, the office buildings that Simon put in, all those parking lots are in front of the building. That's the way this whole area was developed. The only building you have up by the road is on Broadway, the back of buildings, because their parking lots are in front of them on the road. This was, how long ago was it? 30 years ago when this was all done.
But like I said, everything that's to the east of it, they're
only because they front on River Place, so they shove their buildings off River Place and have their parking right in front. And those are, in my opinion, those are not very attractive back ends that we put right on Broadway.
I would agree. I think that that's true with a number of the buildings on Monona Drive too. But I just, it's just to me, it's, and I understand that the Yahara Place is different, but it's obviously an entirely different kind of building and different challenges. So I'll just leave it at that.
I have one other.
Yeah.
I know this might get a little bit more exotic, but just in terms of pushing the building closer to the street and trying to deal with the grade, did you guys do any concept designs of possibly cutting down to the lower elevation, possibly pushing some of the parking underneath the building, still building a two-story building, but building it nearer to the street? That would take the total area of the hardscape it'd reduce the total area of the hardscape because you could still achieve, the same amount of parking that you have, but some amount of it being, basically in a sub-level immediately below the building, with the building towards the higher grade and the other area cut down to grade. You'd take the existing curb cut, you could drive down to the lower grade, resolve your ADA. Again, I just don't know if you went through any ideation exercises with a concept layout like that, and if not, just
So-
put that idea in your head.
Yeah, so what you're saying is basically that you would bring in and drive parking on the lower and still rebuild the building to a two-story up front and bring parking and lower your surface parking on the outside to the underneath of the building, like a lower level parking garage, correct?
Yeah, and knowing that you've got as much parking as you've got, it may not all be able to fit underneath the building, but basically the grade of that parking would be at the lower elevation. You'd tuck what you could under the building, so it's, the footprint, is less, the parking is at the lower elevation grade, the building is closer to the street. You've got a two-story building above it. Now you've got, you have to get people up to level,
Yeah.
so you're going to have an elevator or something like that. But I know it's a little bit exotic, than what you're looking at here.
And you're absolutely correct. And in my head, there for a long time, there was investigation of, I like your word, like an exotic way to make it work. And I think, to your point, all we had done is looked at, utilization of the existing building in terms of expansion and recreation of the footprint. Because the other issue that we had here too in utilizing this building is the first floor of this building actually doesn't qualify for what their needs are as a building, right? So there has to be an expansion on it. So you do bring up a very good point, and I don't think that we ever actually explored, on the the demo of the existing and rebuild of a new closer to the front, and what that would look like from a parking below. But we'll definitely. I always believe that exploring any option is good, because you never know when you're going to come up with something that really fits and makes sense. So we'll definitely take a look at that. That wasn't something that we had. We had entertained versions of that with the existing building, but we hadn't really entertained a version with something, knowing that we're going to demo it. So we'll take a look at that and see the feasibility.
Great, thank you.
Anything else? Yeah. Rob?
I was just looking at the site plan again, and it looks like there is some real estate to be gained in the parking lot in the front drive aisle closest to Broadway. Looks like that first bank of 9 stalls is pressed in. It looks like you have 6 to 7 feet extra that you could shrink up that drive aisle to 24 and then trade in space, because you'd have to move those parking stalls down closer to that sidewalk. But
Right, yeah, we can certainly fine tune that a little bit.
Anything else? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate
you
it.
very much for your time.
Was our feedback helpful? Do you have any other questions of us?
No, that was exactly what we were looking for, and I appreciate everybody's time tonight. We just really wanted to get a sense whether the direction was worth pursuing. So this was very valuable.
I did have one. Sorry.
Sorry.
I just
Brendan?
had one more. Continuing with the exotic notion that I put before you, there was some concerns about parking and safety for, if you were to do something like that where you could tuck underneath the building, there seems like there opens up some maybe creative possibilities for passenger drop-off, for patient drop-off, to where you could have a drive lane, because you have a little bit more real estate that you could work with. You'd have more space. You've got pediatric things. You could drive children up to the front of the building, get people into the building. Nobody has to walk across the parking lot. Again, this would all be, out of the elements underneath the building. Just as you're going through your brainstorming process, that it might open up some additional possibilities for safety. Just
Okay.
wanted to plant the seed for that.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Again, appreciate it. We're going to go to 7A, public hearing on the request by Heidi Faye Tattoos LLC for approval of the zoning permit for new use at 5989 Monona Drive, case number 2-031-2022. Thank
Hello.
you for your patience.
No, absolutely. Thank you guys so very, very much.
This is your time to share anything you'd like about this.
Okay, absolutely. So my name is Heidi Peterson. I am the owner of Heidi Faye Tattoos. I have been in the Madison area for going on 8 years now. And pre-pandemic, I was going to school for my RN degree. And needless to say, with the family life, I was not able to complete that degree. But I wanted to do something with the medical side and the passion of tattooing. So I started doing some research, and I found Par Medical. It is working with breast cancer survivors, and along with like compromised skin. And needless to say, I've been going to get my certifications. And the service that I would like to be offering within the Frostwood Common condos, it's working alongside the Discovery Family Chiropractic office within a 260 square foot little studio space. Is a private-based studio offering services with the paramedical tattooing, the areola reconstruction, body art within the compromised skin, realistic post-surgeries, tattooing, and kind of working alongside the main hospitals within the cancer centers. Kind of what I'm able to do in that space, being able to offer the safe, private, supportive kind of area and like clinical setting is kind of what I'm hoping to do.
Great. Is there anyone else here to speak on, before I close the public hearing on this particular proposal? Online or otherwise? Okay, we're going to close the public hearing and go to 7B, consideration of action on the request by Heidi Faye Tattoos LLC for approval of the zoning permit for a new use at 5989 Monona Drive, case number 2-031-2022. Doug?
Thank you. So the request here is for a new commercial use at the Frostwoods Common Space at 5989 Monona Drive. The space would be approximately 260 square feet for a tattoo parlor with standard tattoo services, but specializing in paramedical tattoos. Business would be open Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. by appointment only, with occasional weekend appointments. The materials state that there's expected to be between 2 and 4 visitors per day. There are no significant changes proposed to the space. It was formerly occupied by William Ryan Holmes until June of 2022, and is currently occupied by Discover Family Chiropractic, who would sublease the space to the applicant. The new use necessitates Plan Commission review and the zoning permits, as put before you. The zoning district is the Community Design District, CDD, and the commercial use appears to align with the zoning as well as the future land use map, which designates this as commercial. Very limited building modifications are put forward as mentioned in the application. At most, the applicant plans to install a sink. Pretty much everything else would be aesthetic, very limited changes. The services would be by appointment only with 1 employee, so there would not be very significant parking demand. And the materials state that for the 3 tenants in the center at the condo building, there are 54 parking stalls. The hours of operation would be by appointment only with occasional weekend hours. and staff recommends approval with the 3 conditions as listed in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you. Where to go now? Do you want to start, Chris? Chris 1?
Is Chris?
Yeah.
Excuse me, okay. Have you ever done something like this before? Had to go get an approval or a permit for something like this?
No.
Well, I just wanted to compliment you. You did a really nice job. I suspect you hadn't done a lot of this, but you did a nice job putting together a packet, explaining what you wanted to do, and having it all organized for us. So, nice job.
Thank you.
I don't have any issues with this use being there at all.
I have no issues either.
Okay.
I'm good.
Sue, good? Yep.
Happy that you're coming to Monona.
Hey, thank you.
Okay, Brian.
No concern. The only thing I'd point out is if you're looking for a sign in the future, we'll get to see you again.
Yay. Does that include any kind of vinyl signing on door?
There are some temporary, or there are some signs that don't require plan commission review, and some of that will be window signage and things. So I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Thank you so much.
Great. Brendan?
I agree with Chris's opening comments. I think you did a really nice job preparing this. I really like the concept of your business, and yep, I have no issues.
Okay. Susan?
And same, no concerns, sounds great to me, and yeah, welcome.
Oh, I can't wait. Thank you guys so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, I would just echo the same. I'm very appreciative of what you're coming to Monona and what you're offering here, and I know how important what you're suggesting the paramedic activities is for many, many people. So thank you for that, and welcome to Monona.
Wonderful. I look forward to being part of your guys' community.
Yeah. Yeah. Do I have a motion?
I'll move
Okay.
approval with
I'll second.
conditions.
I have a second, and I have a motion and a second. Anything else? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Now, again, welcome to Monona.
You got too excited.
Thank you. Well, have a wonderful evening.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you too. Number 7C, public hearing for Stella and David Patton on the request of consideration for survey map CSM to consolidate 2 lots for purposes of constructing a new single-family residence at 5405 and 5407 Tony Wather Trail, case number 2-032-2022. If you could go up to the podium,
For the
that would be
hundreds of
great.
people watching online.
Posterity. It's your posterity.
I just want to say we do have a quorum, so if you need to leave. Seriously.
No place I'd rather be. No.
Hi, my name is Stella Patton. My husband right there is Dave Patton. And yes, exactly what you mentioned. We're requesting a zoning permit change of the 2 separate lots, 5407 and 5405 Tony Wather Trail, combining them into one single lot for the purposes of a rebuild of a new home. And the CSM and zoning permit application was completed by Noah Prevey of Williamson Survey and Associates and submitted to Doug on October 13th. So I believe you have all of that, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else here this evening that is here to speak on this particular, during the public hearing section? Not seeing any. Seeing that, we'll close the public hearing section. And we will move to the pre-hearing conference for Stella and David Patton on the request for consideration of a certified survey map, CSM, to consolidate 2 lots for the purpose of constructing a new single-family residence at 5405 and 5407 Tony Wather Trail, case number 032-2022.
Thank you. As mentioned, the CSM request here for 2 lots into 1 to build a new single-family residence across the 2 existing parcels. The process here is outlined in the staff report. A recommendation from Public Works Committee will also be required. That's tentatively on the schedule for early December, as well as a public hearing or a formal consideration from the Planning Commission and future consideration from City Council. The parcels are part of the Monona Ridge plat and have not been subdivided, so they meet the standards as required for the CSM. One thing to point out here is access to streets is required. Typically that would be 60 feet in width. Tony Awatha Trail at this portion is just 20 feet in width. It is an existing condition and the Commission has previously granted exceptions for that, but it is something at this pre-hearing that should be discussed. A little different to normal here is that there are standards for the lot dimensions for single-family residence district, which these 2 lots do fall within. The minimum lot size would be 10,000 square feet. Minimum lot frontage would be 70, and the minimum lot width at the building line would be 60 feet. As proposed, the total lot area is just over 18,500, and the frontage along Tony Awatha is just under 100 feet. I'll also be working with the applicant on future design concepts for the property and how that can work within the permissible zoning. With that, the only other thing was when this was shared with city staff for review and comment, the Public Works Director did highlight the sanitary sewer main, the easement that will be back there as well. So again, that'll be one of the parameters that I'll be working with them on, but nothing else from me. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That I'll open it up. Susan?
Yeah, I guess, can you clarify your comment that it ends up being 20 feet at Tony Awatha? Because we're combining lots, not dividing lots. I'm not.
That comment was the road width of Tony Awatha.
Oh, okay, I got it. Okay, got it. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, I went by and looked at it. It makes sense to me. I don't have an issue with it. I think it's fine, and I think it will be important, obviously, to pay attention to those easements. And yeah, I mean, that'll have to stay. But otherwise, I thought it made sense.
Brendan?
Nice to meet you. I
Nice to meet you.
I live just down the street. We're on the 5300 block.
That's so nice to meet someone in our future neighborhood.
So I have mixed feelings, mixed comments about it because I feel your pain as it relates to the narrowness of the frontage. Right across from us, there's a couple of other examples of where lots have been combined. There's a lot of challenges developing as it relates to the property right along the lakefront, and the idea of losing the lot is a little bit heartbreaking where we're combining lots, but that 50 foot's pretty difficult to deal with, and that lot that's next to you, that empty lot, the house that you can't even see from the street, like I understand from a practical perspective, even just navigating with cars and the elevation change that's there. If I was in your position, I'd be putting forward probably a similar request. It's just unfortunate that the lots are as narrow as they are. I think the frontage on my property is like 45 feet. It's very narrow. So I empathize with why you're presenting it. It's a bummer to be losing the 2 separate lots, but I think that if I was in your position, I'd be bringing forward the same request.
Is the house that's on the northern lot proposed to stay, or is it demo both eventually?
Could you repeat that?
The house is that just the boathouse that's back there?
Oh, 5407, the home, that's what we're planning to demo. On the other one, 5405, is a boathouse that we plan to keep for now, and not sure what we're going to do with it, but we like it.
And the easement for sanitary, that's not on this CSM?
Correct.
Okay. But we'll have it there for the Public Works meeting next week? Because they're going to want to see it?
Yeah, I will coordinate with the surveyor, most likely not in the materials that'll go out in the next day or two, but I'll make the ask that it will at least be shown in the meeting itself next Wednesday.
I just happen to chair that group, and I know that will come up. Other than that, I completely understand. I understand what's going on here. I share Brandon's concerns, but it would be a much more buildable space.
Thank you.
Great. I was actually going to ask about that sewer line since it's not on there myself, because it seems like that would be exactly where that is. Might be really important to know and see. Rob?
Yeah, I looked and looked again, and then looked again to try to find it. I think that was the only thing that I had to comment on the lots themselves. But yeah, I guess other than losing a lot in Monona, I don't think I have an issue with it.
Is it possible that the sewer line that we're referencing is situated in such a way that it would become moot
No,
for you to combine the lots?
no.
No.
It runs in the back, all the homes through there.
It's north-south.
Okay, it's north-south. Okay, all right. Just want to make sure. Chris, 2?
I'm at the 5200 block of Tony Iwata, so I'm also your neighbor. And yeah, I mean, we're always sad to lose a lot, but I completely understand why you're making this request. And as Rob said, if I owned both these lots and wanted to build a house, I'd be doing the same thing. So I'm good with it.
Thank you.
No comments.
Good.
First, thanks for waiting. It's been a long night. hasn't it?
Oh, sure. I just wanted to meet everybody.
Can you imagine that we volunteer to do this? We're crazy.
I commend you.
You normally wouldn't come here. Residential is normally handled with building inspection and everything. The reason you're here, of course, is because of the CSM. CSM, there has to be a recommendation from here to the council, so that's why you have these extra steps. Having said that, I don't believe that's a boathouse down there. I believe it's a home.
Oh, you're right. They call it a boathouse,
It's a home.
but it is
But it's a
used
home.
as a home,
And
right?
once you combine the lots, there can only be one home on a lot. We don't allow two homes on a lot, so that would have to be removed. You can't have two homes on a single lot. And if you go down and look at it, it's a home. And it's been there for a long time. Tough access, but it's a home. So
Can it be remodeled into
No,
a
we
typical
have a very
boathouse?
specific, you can build a boathouse. We have a very specific ordinance for that, but it's not nearly the size of what you have down there. So that's something you'd have to work out with probably building inspection
Okay.
as far as what you can have, but you can't have a separate home down there. If every neighbor up and down the lake would want a party home down on the lake. I mean, it's natural, it'd be nice to have, but we have to have consistency with it too.
Well, I don't know the total history, but there is a dry boathouse at the lower level.
Yeah, that's part of it, but you have an entire home above it.
Yeah, but would it be possible, maybe again, this is for the future, to take off the home part?
Absolutely, and that's again something to work with the building inspector on.
okay.
It's absolutely, you're right, and if you're going to do anything, now is the time before you put your home up above. Now is absolutely your time, because it's tough access. The only way you're going to get access is the best way to get access is when you have that home down and you get good access to the lake. It's going to be tough with that sewer line that runs through there, and that furnishes the sewer for a lot of the homes along there. It's just in the old day with the cabins, they ran it back there instead of in the road. But yeah,
Okay.
you could work with building inspection, and Doug can help you through some of that too, as far as what is allowed for a boathouse, the sizes and what it can be.
Okay.
So, yeah, you're absolutely allowed that, and if I were you, I'd be doing it right now,
Oh, okay.
right when you're building.
Sounds good.
The survey, the CSM this we had said, well, we didn't do a title report, so we don't know if there's any easements, we can't have, I mean, your surveyor will have to do a title search and have to show any easements. That's where the sanitary sewer would have shown up, but any other easements that happen to be on the property show up through that, and they need to be on the CSM. For example, if the Public Works Director had noted that sewer and none of us knew about it, I mean, you could have designed a building over the top of it, for example, or you could have damaged it during construction. It's really important to have all that information on the CSM. A couple more things about the CSM is 20 Watha Trail is not a 20-foot right-of-way, not even close. That's an error. And so that's something they'll have to look it up and get it right. But the road itself is wider than 20 feet. I know for a fact that's a lot bigger than a 20-foot right-of-way, so that's just an error on it. I'm assuming we're going to have Vera Becker review the CSM?
Yes.
Okay. And then, of course, have him pay attention to who he's submitting it to. And I know you know that it's not found done, and it doesn't have to go through Dane County. When it goes through us, it gets directly recorded. It doesn't go to Dane County after that. And that's it. I mean, I'm sorry you have to go through this, but it's to combine lots. You have to come see us, and you have to see Public Works, and you have to see the City Council, and that's basically state ordinance to go through these steps to be able to do anything with the CSM. You're not creating a lot, you're combining it with the same process.
We don't mind.
And that's a lot. And you'll work with, if you do choose to try to change a setback, and the building inspection will look at it, if they think it's a change, then you work with ZBA, who's very experienced with this. And I know you put in your note that you want to be able to be the same as adjacent properties, and they'll look at all that. Make sure your surveyor, you're paying him, make sure he gets buildings 2 on each side, because a lot of times ZBA likes to see 2 buildings on each side. So while you're paying him to do it, have those buildings pointed out, because if you don't meet the automatic setback, if that's not something, and I don't know what it's like in there, but you're trying to get even with your adjacent neighbors, which they generally, the ZBA is really good about all that. They're not, it's a fight. Everybody wants to be closest to the lake, right? Because you're the closest, you have the best view, and you can see out your side windows. Well, it's a continual fight between property owners to try to be the closest one there and have the best view. So they have to be very particular in what they do, and they have to be very careful with the adjacent properties. So that'll be a different process if you have to go through it.
Okay.
And do you staff that one, Doug?
Yes.
Oh, well, there you go. Doug's your man.
Great. Okay. Anything else? Do you understand?
Not everything, but that's why I have these guys here.
All right.
But
Well,
thank you very much for
Thank you.
meeting with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Again, thank you for your patience.
Oh, of course. Thank
And
you.
these are recorded, so if you wanted to go back and listen,
Oh,
you can
okay.
find us on YouTube.
Oh.
You'll be the first few.
Okay, thank you.
That takes us to E and F, and I'm pleased to report that E and F are no longer needed this evening because Flora and Decor has withdrawn their application for now. Or yeah, here's your birthday present. There you go. All right, so with that, we will move to number 8, reports of staff and commission members. The staff report, economic development.
Thank you. I will keep this brief. Economic development update. The CDA tomorrow evening will be considering the development agreement for the Bloom. So they'll most likely be going into closed session to consider that. So things continue to move with that project. As far as upcoming items for the December 12th meeting, expecting to have a formal consideration of the dental clinic over at 605 West Broadway. They submitted their materials and they're currently being reviewed by Vera Becker, so all being well, that will be on for the 12th. Additionally, a couple zoning permits for new tenants moving into the former Hobby Lobby space. Expecting that to come in, a possible division of that space with 2 new tenants moving there. And then a couple sign permits being requested for Monona Bank with the branding change as well. So that would be for the property both down at Bridge, the corner of Bridge there, as well as up on the drive. So a few things that will be teeing up for that in advance of the December 26th meeting being canceled, and most likely the January 9th as well. Thanks.
Great. Any updates, discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts?
Nothing from staff.
Anything from, as it relates to sustainability? Okay, any requests? Corey?
I have a question. I think I've asked this before, I'm sorry, but when the CDA is looking at the proposals, is there a set of criteria that is pretty standard that they're looking at? And is affordable housing a piece of it, or is that not a piece of it?
So there are sort of typical standards. One of the main ones being the financial component. So they will be looking at the projected value for the project and make sure that any allocation or any amount that is approved would be able to be paid back, which will be driven by the rents that it can achieve and things like that. So that there is sort of an ongoing discussion with how that plays into the discussion of workforce housing and the market rate projects will give off maybe a higher value than workforce projects. So how can other elements come into play there as well? So it is something that they're considering, but they do also look at these projects from more of a holistic approach as well. So, for example, the applicants that came before us first tonight, they'll be going forward tomorrow for more of an informational presentation where just a high-level discussion will be had. So before they even get into the financials, is this the type of project that the CDA would consider? So they do look at those, and it's a pretty varied and a wide range of folks on there with 2 alders as well. So I think they are looking for that, and certainly the alders are messaging that as well, that is the as was heard tonight, the will of the council as well. So it does get considered, but from a financial perspective, that's always the challenge with that.
Right. And do you do the CDA as well?
Yes.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up to that, Corey, I mean, that's, we can, and this applies frankly to condo versus apartment too. We can encourage people, right, on the affordable housing front and on the condo front versus apartments or whatever, but in the absence of having, well, first of all, on the financial front, that's definitely CDA, that's not us, right? And as Doug just said, I mean, their responsibility is to use dollars wisely in terms of assurance that that development is going to make its increment. And, and second, as it relates to something like condos versus apartments, in the absence of either zoning or a housing plan, a larger strategic housing plan that dictates some areas as being zoned for condos versus other areas being zoned for apartments, or our hands are fairly tied. We don't because in terms of what comes before us, unless because if somebody were to come in front of us and say, I want to build apartments here, and there's nothing in the zoning that reflects that. It's a residential, it's a multifamily area, and there's nothing in the zoning, unless there's some other thread that allows us to say, no, you can't do that there. We can't, because the developer could come back and say, we're meeting your zoning guidelines. How can you turn me down? Right? There has to be some other reason. And that reason being that we either, shift zoning, or we have a plan that reflects what we want to see in the longer term, which is why we got into the conversation around, is it time to update the housing, strategic housing plan?
Yes.
Because, and we know it is. But that makes sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's frustrating.
I was just asking about where the drivers are for the affordable housing consideration. so.
Right.
Because I know it's not, we don't have that. but-
Right, right.
I will just add something else that is a component that is under the CDA's purview is the Renew Monona program, which
okay.
does have, is intended as an affordability component. It's primarily targeted at single-family residences, but that includes down payment assistance options, but also renovations and major home rehab. So it's certainly picking up in prominence against 2% loan. So, and it's based upon the assessed value of the property. So that is, it's effectively the end of the district. There's an opportunity to spend down some of that additional increment, and that goes towards affordability for this. So at this point, it's targeted at the single family, but that does have a component that the CDA administers that would benefit single-family residences, certainly.
Okay. Anything else? Chris?
Thanks. I have a comment, but then if I can, I just wanted to expand on Doug's comment too about CDA.
Right.
It's a balance of affordability and economic sustainability for the city, because I think what most people don't understand, and I'm throwing out wild numbers, I have no idea what the real numbers are, but for example, the thing we approved down at the Chief Yard, right? Mm-hmm. That might cost $20 million. I'm throwing out numbers to build that, but it won't get assessed at that, because they'll assess it based on what the rents are. So when you have subsidized rents and the rents are lower, it might end up being assessed at $12 million. So when the CDA does all this, they say, well, yeah, we want that, we can do it, but it's not a $20 million increment like we hear when they come to us. It's really a $12 million increment. And then they have to look at paying back that loan, but not only that, they have to look at the future viability of Monona to have that loss of $8 million of assessable value each and every year after they pay back the TIF financing. So it's rather complicated, and I don't think people realize that you take a hit on the assessed value forever, as long as it's underwritten on the rents. We can only assess at fair market value, which is based on the income of the building. And to that, I think we've talked about that here, and diversity of housing stock is not only diversity as a type of housing, but diversity of what you have within that type. And where we have some affordable housing there, I don't think it's horrible to have some market rate along with that. You have some diversity within the apartment market, but that's not what I actually raised my hand for.
Okay.
We used to have a protocol here, and I thought we even passed something in our ordinance that allowed it, but that when an applicant came here, they couldn't even put in an application for a zoning permit if they still had outstanding conditions on their old ones. I bring that up because, for example, Floor and Decor would not even been allowed to be on the agenda because they haven't done their landscaping the way it was proposed, and they know that. They did some goofy things to the hydrants behind the building that they shouldn't have, and that has to be fixed, and I don't think Dan Stefani's even had a call back or communication from them on it yet. And then Joan would always go through every applicant, and she'd say if there was taxes that hadn't been paid or assessments that weren't paid, they again wouldn't get put on an agenda until they were up to date with all that. So we used to have a protocol where all that got checked. I bet you remember it, Brian.
It's ringing a bell.
Yep, and all that got checked. We even passed some different thing that allowed us to do that, but they have to be in compliance with their existing zoning permits and with all their fees to the city before they can even be put on the agenda.
Okay.
And that's a trigger that we have, and perhaps at times should be used.
I honestly am not aware of that, or just not aware of that, so.
No, I'm sure not, but it's in there, and we've used it, so take a look, and it makes sense. I mean, everyone we get, I mean, I know you submit it to staff, and it'd be a good thing to talk about at your staff meetings, and every staff member would know too, if there's an outstanding condition, Dan would know that, hey, yeah, if they've got a problem with those hydrants there, no, they've got a problem here that they haven't responded to. If Joan looks at it and sees that they've unpaid fees or taxes, it wouldn't get put on an agenda. And so when you do your staff handouts, it's just something that, I don't know if you can start a new protocol with that or something amongst staff, but I think it's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the hydrants, we got a response today.
Oh, did you today?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to nose into his business. This is so barren back there. I didn't know anybody even saw what they did.
Well, now we're all
I doubt it.
With that, I just want to point out, yeah, one final thing.
Just like the way the meeting's set up,
Yeah.
when they speak up there, that gentleman was like on camera the whole time that was sitting there. I don't know, if we can put a, don't sit here if you don't want to be in TV.
I did feel bad for him. That was,
Right. I don't know.
we should
Someone can do something with that.
You could
It's a
see
little bit
that.
of an odd configuration. I mean, I mean, just because the people have to stand there and speak, it'd be nice not to have people sitting right in front of them, too. I think.
Yeah, maybe we can make sure that when people come in, they sit over on this side instead of over there, unless they, I mean, it's not that much of a walk to the podium. Okay, anything else? Holy cow, it's 20 minutes to 9, kids. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a second, I have a motion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
I forgot to ask what were you gonna say?
About exactly what